All right. We're live again. Sorry about that, everyone. We were having some technical issues with Streamlabs. I don't know what's going on with Streamlabs or OBS. So we have shifted over to StreamYard as a backup here. So this should be better. But I guess is Enrique Howard back? Wow. And appreciate the commentary of the Bethesda Radio Arcade podcast. So Logic, I believe they were saying, so we summed up the reviews for Starfield, currently an 88 on PC, 87 on Xbox Series X. We were discussing some of I was sharing some of the review commentary for some of the review sites that give it very high scores. And then we started discussing the one thing that I've been seeing with the Starfield review. One common thing that I've been seeing is that long ramp up period where people have said, reviewers have said, hey, you spend 20 plus hours in the game, and then it finally opens up and, it starts getting good. And that's where that's where we start having problems again. So Logic, you were responding to, I asked you, what your thoughts were with that long ramp up period for Starfield.
Yeah. So as I start going back through this again in the chat, if I'm covering stuff that you guys did hear, just let me know. Also, since we're readjusted mic inputs here, also let me know if my mic is too loud. But what I was saying about, and I can't remember now. I can't remember. So what I was saying about review scores, and again, if anybody heard what I said about review scores, tell me to stop. Was that review scores are kind of settling in right where, right in between what a lot of Xbox fans thought they were going to be and what I predicted, which, saw a lot of Xbox fans predicting, low to mid 90s, and I predicted low to mid 80s. And right now, review scores from the media are settling in the high 80s. The dynamic of that is there were lots of review sites that didn't get review codes, and so if they are finally accessing the game, last night and had to pay for early access to get to it, then I suspect and hope that what they will do is they will do their due diligence and not be spiteful, over not getting a review code and, actually spend the Labor Day weekend playing the game. And then, we'd expect those scores to start rolling in kind of, coming out of the weekend, the beginning of next week. Since we're also seeing mods start to land from the PC mod community, I would also hope that those reviewers don't incorporate use of the mods in their write-ups of the reviews and their scoring of the game. And so that, we get an interpretation of what their, pure native Bethesda experience, playing the game was. As far as the long on-ramp, my personal feeling is I think we see the long on-ramp in lots of other games. It's not uncommon. And especially in lots of other games where, those games have gone on to very high critical acclaim and high sales numbers. So I was talking earlier about Monster Hunter World, which, is very abrupt for me. And I didn't stick with the game because of the long onboarding period. But it went on to high critical acclaim and high sales numbers. Ditto for Red Dead Redemption 2, which I felt had a long, boring onboarding. And that game is considered one of the best that's ever been made. I think where it's relevant and impactful is that long onboarding is indicative of other things in the design that I talked about before the game launched in early access, which was that my sense of it was that, in building Starfield, they were hitting the point where they saw the reality of Skyrim. And then with the acquisition, where Microsoft started keying on, what does this mean for us as a business? And I feel like what's inherently wrapped into the design of Starfield is the intention that it's a platform and it's something that's going to be monetized and that we're all going to be playing over the next 10 years. And so it has the same kind of aspirations of longevity as Destiny 2 and Halo Infinite. And, it will be a different game 5 years from now than it is today. And I think that helped drive the long onboarding. And quite honestly, I think that is more impactful than the simple fact that there's long onboarding itself.
Yeah, so basically the long game here, that this game is going to be a platform, and actually that's one of the things that some of the reviewers were highlighting, that while the game may have missed certain marks or maybe didn't do certain things well today, that they could see this turning into a platform or a game that just has long longevity, where people are going to be that Bethesda's going to be building on this world and adding new content. And then we talk about the mod community. We know what the mod community's done for other Bethesda games. And I think one of the reviewers, I don't recall who it was, but mentioned that the content creators are going to have, as this game grows, that there's going to be a lot of things that content creators will do with this game. So yeah, I don't disagree. I think that this game is going to be something that evolves over the next, I don't know if I would say 10 years, but geez, I mean, how many times did they release Skyrim, and how many more mods have we seen Skyrim since Skyrim launched many years ago? So there's actually a mod out. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's my benchmark, right? I mean, Skyrim has been 10 years, right?
Yeah. It's been, when did Skyrim release? I'll look that up here real quick. Because you're right. I mean, Skyrim has built this community. And I think we talked about that earlier today. Like, we talked about that this game 12 years ago, Skyrim released November 10th, 2011. But like you said, you talked about that this game really fits kind of Microsoft's or Xbox's idea of putting out content and games that build communities. This is it. And very similar to Skyrim. We talk about the Skyrim communities. We talk about the modding community in Skyrim. There's actually a PC mod out right now, if you've seen this game Logic, where, oh my goodness, like the Skyrim, it's a graphics mod that looks incredible. Makes Skyrim look like current gen almost. But no, I agree with you 100%. I think this thing is going to have long legs, and it's going to be this ongoing platform.
Yeah, and what I actually said to you was a bit of a criticism of that aspect. What I actually said was, Starfield to me really maps perfectly to the Xbox business approach this generation, which is always that the games are coming, they'll be here next year. And to a certain extent, that's what I see reflected in Starfield, right? That, Starfield is much more about deploying something that is of potential, and, more so than it is about, what it is at initial release. So, if you're disappointed with Starfield today, don't worry, the game's still coming next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, right?
And actually, that's a fair criticism. Again, in the reviews, many of the reviews have talked about that there are aspects of this game that don't feel complete.
Yeah, and I mean, and please, chat, don't take this as like a summary statement, because this is not my summation of where I am on Starfield. I'm only a couple of hours in. But generally what I do is I start, it's kind of like a meal in a restaurant, right? I go into a meal in a restaurant, 5, 10, 15 minutes in, I put down my first feeling of what the meal is like. And then it wavers, right, over the next hour or so. It goes left and it goes right. Same thing with a movie, whatever. So where I am here with Starfield is that there's a lot of ambition here. There's a lot of scale. There's a lot of scope, like what I mentioned the night before it dropped. But for every single one, and there's a ton of systems, and I talked about that too, that my feeling is Todd Howard loves building games with lots of systems, lots of mini games, lots of metas. And that's his design approach and design aesthetic, and that's what he feels like is right what skates him towards success. My problem with Starfield, and again, it's a me problem, in how it's very things that I'm hyper specific about in games, and I have spent a lot of time playing sci-fi, space simulation, space jockey type of games, and Starfield treads on those territories, although that's not what it is. But for every single one of the little metas, mini games, subsystems that are within Starfield, I can pretty quickly identify what to me is a game that did that better. Right? And none of those games do those things in aggregate, but the impact it has on me is every time I'm in space combat, I think of all the games that do space combat better. Every time I am in first-person shooter combat, I think of games that do shooter combat better. Every time I'm traversing, I feel, I think about games that do that better. And I'm talking about space sci-fi games, right? And so what I wind up walking away with in my head is this art gallery of other games that Starfield isn't. And the question is going to be, is that what sticks with me and sticks in my craw, right, as I walk away from the game or at least complete the initial campaign? Or do I have this feeling of, okay, but what was the total package delivery and how does that make me feel?
Logic, what are some of the other space exploration games that you're benchmarking Starfield against?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I would use benchmarking. That's a really strong term.
That's fair.
And admittedly, I haven't done enough soul searching to determine if I'm doing that. But like, for instance, the thing that we saw in the trailer, which was like that jump across the canyon with the jetpack.
Yeah.
Right. And so that aerial combat. Now, I don't have the jetpack yet, so it's not that. But the game does allow you to traverse. And I have gone to some planets that are low gravity planets where you're vertical, and you and I talked about the verticality, right? And in particular, I felt that was a thing that Halo 5 did well, is it added a lot of additional verticality to Halo that hadn't been there before.
The grapple hook.
Yeah, no, Halo 5, not Halo Infinite.
Oh, I'm sorry. You did say Halo. Yeah, you're right with Halo 5 with the jetpack and everything.
The jet boost. So my problem, like that doesn't land for me in Starfield right now is the verticality and the aerialization of combat. As soon as I launch into the air, and you can cover some pretty decent distances, as soon as I launch into the air, like, to me, accuracy just goes entirely out the window. And so it doesn't feel as good as, to me, what like a Destiny 2 feels like. Now, again, the Destiny 2 physics model is a little different, and it's a little different in like what you're doing and what's going on. But it is akin to, and it is similar, and that's the thing that sticks in my head. Like jumping and shooting in Destiny 2 is quite frankly like a beautiful experience, But that's not what Starfield is. You jump into the air, you feel very clunky, you feel like in fact what it's akin to is, remember the very first Iron Man, where he had like the clunky iron suit. That's what I feel like. I feel like I'm in like the clunky Iron Man suit. And it's really only good for covering a distance, but there's no offensive applicability to it. In space combat, like the first immediate thing that jumped into my mind was, I was like, oh, this is Freelancer. I mean, and I spent dozens and dozens and dozens of hours in Freelancer. But one of the things that we mentioned, which we're going to link to here in the Ryan McCaffrey discussion, is there is no FOV slider. So I first clicked immediately, oh, this is Freelancer. And then I clicked immediately to, hey, the enemies that I'm trying to track are much more quickly out of my range of peripheral vision and my ability to track the ship. There's also no, I have to look, maybe I missed it in Space Combat. I don't know that there is a radar display in this and such that helps you, that when like the enemy tracks out of your visual range, that you can look at a radar screen and get a sense of where they are. I think that maybe there's one there and I didn't pay any attention to. What I paid attention to was the little target icons that were out on the edges of my peripheral vision, but it also just made me hyper aware at that point in time. I was like, there's no FOV slider in this thing. So if I feel like my width of vision is too constrained, there's nothing I can do about it.
Well, to your point, Logic, I'm sorry to interrupt, but before I forget this point, like we talked about the lack of FOV. When I got to that part of the game, what you said, I'm like, oh, okay. That now now that really resonates even more, because you can't really see, even though there's a radar, I guess, at the ship that shows you where the other enemy ships are at. It isn't enough. It's very I found like I should be able to have I should be able to easily find some of the ships that I'm in combat with that are clearly flying around me because they're locking on me with their missiles. And I found that to be a little more challenging than it probably needed to be. And maybe an FOV would have helped with that. But go ahead, man. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, right. And there's, I mean, I feel like the HUD isn't great. Like the missile just shows up as text at the top of your HUD, which to me, just to me, and again, this is a hyper me specific thing, right? Is it's just not where my eyes are trained to go. Where I'm looking for an MFD, or what we call a multifunction display, which is normally what's in an aircraft or any kind of high speed combat vehicle, which is where all your system statuses are displayed in things like your ammo, right? It comes up as just this textual representation at the top of your transparent HUD. Now, in time I'll get accustomed to that and I'll get used to it, but it was just, again, it caused me to think of, okay, well, Elite Dangerous and Star Citizen and, even Star Wars Squadrons, quite frankly, even has better space combat in my mind than Starfield does. But that's just, I mean, those are the comparisons that, depending on what demographic, right, you're presenting the game to, right, those are things that may leap to some of their minds. Other people won't bug them because that's not like the ilk that they're built in.
Yeah, no, that's a fair assessment. I mean, that's kind of what. And by the way, I need to preface it because I know it's going to happen. People are going to say we're hating on Starfield. No, we're not. Obviously, the larger conversation is outside of these things that we're experiencing. How does the rest of the game work? Which we'll talk about as we start logging more hours into Starfield. A game is a sum of its parts. These things exist on a spectrum. While this could be a minor thing that Logic and I would prefer to have an FOV in space combat, and I found myself kind of like, okay, where are these enemy ships? I can't find them. They're tracking, but I can't see them. Again, just for me, something that I've noticed, but somebody else might not. It might not be a big deal to them. Again, these are just our impressions, but unfortunately, I have to preface that because people feel like anytime you offer constructive criticism or an analysis of a game and experience you've had, it's automatically hate if you're not pom-pomming and shaking your fist and saying, "Yeah, this rules." So
right. Let me say, FOV. I mean, I'm sure lots of people here don't listen to enough to keep going. Like FOV is that's just like a religious staple. Like I just get personally offended by a game when it doesn't have an FOV slider, because what sticks with me to this day is Killzone 2. Killzone 2, I think it was Killzone 2. Killzone 2 on PlayStation 2. Was it on PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 3?
PlayStation 3.
I can't remember. Yeah, so PlayStation 3. That game actually made me physically ill because of how boxed in the FOV was, and from that point, right, as a gamer forward, I was just like more intensely bothered by any game, right, that didn't have an FOV slider, or at least didn't like widen FOV out sufficiently to 90 degrees or higher.
By the way, I was looking for the word to describe my first space, like first engagement in space. Boxed in is how I felt. Yeah.
And it was weird. And again, I'm just describing my own experience, not saying this is an indictment against the game. It was weird because, of course, I got in the ship, got out into space. It asked me if I wanted to do the space combat tutorial. And of course, in a very, very common game logic approach to things, in my arrogance, I said, I don't need to do any freaking space combat tutorial. I was like, I've been flying spaceships forever. So I skipped it. Well, I mean, things come at you pretty heavy and fast in that initial space combat. Then I was scrambling around trying to figure out how to rebalance power and yada, yada, yada. So that instance, that wasn't due to the game. That was due to me. But I will say, right, one of the things that will occur in this game is there are things that they don't tell you that can cause you some issues. Like they don't really, I mean, I feel like there was a heavy lean on, well, everybody playing this game is a Bethesda fan and knows how lockpicking works. And lockpicking initially to me is not intuitive. I eventually figured it out, actually, because of a game bug that caused me to have to go through that sequence twice. And finally on the second loop around, I got it. But like the way they explained it, at least to me, I didn't grok with. Maybe it will to some others, but I feel like there are systems in this game where they don't really, explain them to you as much as they maybe should.
Yeah. Look. Yeah. No, I don't disagree with that. Yeah. Forte looks like. Correct me if I'm wrong, Forte, but it sounds like you may have found a workaround to the FOV in a file on PC. Yeah, it sounds like what he's saying. He's saying that the NII file to fix that on PC. I don't know what file I was referring to. Yeah, I don't know. But anyhow, Well, I will say this though. Oh, okay. Yeah. See, yeah, he's saying that he did. Okay, that's okay. So you can actually do that then. Okay, that's good to know, Forte. Thank you. Now, have you been playing it first person, or have you been toggling back between first person and third person, or have you been playing it mostly in third person?
I have just for artistic purposes, just to kind of look at it and marvel at. Like there are some neat sequences where if I'm standing still and not planning on really going anywhere, I'll pop it into third person view. But by and large, I'm what did I say? First, no, there's sometimes that I pop it into third person view, but by and large, I'm playing it in first person because the game really isn't that performant on PC. And so in first person view, I feel like there's less of a hit to performance. So that's the way I'm playing it.
Yeah, me too. I've been toggling back between first person, third person, but for the reasons you mentioned, because I don't want that hit. But I did try like the first combat sequence that I had, not the ship combat sequence, but the first combat sequence against pirates using a weapon. And basically I was toggling back and forth because I wanted to see if there was a hit to my frames, and I didn't notice anything. It was pretty consistent. But speaking of frames, I mean, I'm running a 3070 GPU and a 12,700K CPU, Intel CPU. And, you know, I have a mixture of high, medium settings, some low settings, but mostly a mixture of medium and high. And with FSR 2.0 enabled, I'm getting about, I mean, I've gotten as high as 90 FPS in more confined areas. But with the action sequence, the first against the pirates, my frame rates were about like 58 to about 62 FPS, kind of going back and forth in that range. So that's what I've been seeing. The other thing that, and we talked about this earlier, that I was surprised in the settings menu is that it's very limited in terms of on PC, in terms of what you can, how much flexibility they give you with adjusting for the in-game settings. Like, yes, you could turn down like shadows and fog and particle effects and things like that, but no HDR. There wasn't an option to adjust brightness or contrast. And I was surprised by how little options they gave you on PC. And I'm coming off and I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3, as many know right now. And that game has a ton of options in terms of settings, and other PC games have done the same. So I was kind of surprised by that logic. Were you surprised by that as well, that they didn't offer a lot of the settings that we're used to on the PC side of things?
I don't know that I could say surprised. I will definitely say disappointed. There's a total of 17 toggles and settings you can flip around in terms of graphical settings. There are, and I'm just picking it out of my head. I would actually need to take this table and lay it while I'm looking in another game and kind of compare. But like some basic things that are jumping out, like there's no ambient occlusion setting. There is no. So there is depth of field. There is motion blur.
I'm sorry, lads. Let me interrupt here real quick. Captain Ply. Yeah, no, I understand that their games have had very limited settings on PC, but this is also 2023. But go ahead, Game Logic.
Yeah, so it's just a very limited, number of things that you can use to tweak your experience. And as far as like how it performs, so I'm running it right now. I've got it on one system. I've got 3 other systems that I'll try it out on. Right now I'm running it on an AMD Ryzen 5600X CPU with an RTX 3070 Ti GPU. And there are certain things for me. Again, these are like things that are hyper specific to Game Logic that I don't do and that I don't use. I do not alter render resolution. I'm generally religiously insistent that I be able to scale at 100% render resolution. I typically do not utilize VSync unless I actually see tearing, which I just normally don't. So those are 2 things that I mean, after all was said and done, I sent you guys in the BRAP chat, like in our podcasting channel on Twitter, I sent you guys in Slow Mo and Forte an article on digital trends that gave you recommended settings, right? And despite the fact that there's just things, there's some things in there that I'd never normally do. After 30 minutes or so, I just had to capitulate and surrender and give up and use these settings. When I was trying to run at 100% render resolution and have VSync off, I was getting kind of what some articles had said before, which was like in the 45 to 60 frames per second area. And then there's some weirdisms too in the game where, like, in certain menus and in certain cutscenes, it'll ramp up as much as, oh yeah, I also never turn on dynamic resolution, which is just a pet peeve of mine. I'm like, I want the resolution that I want. I'm fine if the frames, if the frames waver, right? But I don't like, I don't like the experience of keeping consistent frames but altering the resolution. That's just me. But these recommended settings, they do have you turn dynamic resolution on. So, but there's some weirdisms in the game where, like, in certain menus and certain cutscenes, like, I've seen the game scale all the way up to like 120 frames per second, but then I've seen some where it seems to be locked at like 40, capped at like 42. So there's some weirdisms like that. Again, just in menus and cutscenes. But the general gist of it is, in order to get to where I'm consistently running at like 90 frames per second, with dips down to like the 70s, I've had to utilize these settings, which again, have some of my pet peeves, but for a game that has some reliance and some, has some dependencies on you being able to play, in my mind, a first person shooter kind of mini game well, and especially space combat, like, I just want to be up, in the 90 frame range. And so these are the settings that do it on that system. My highest end system is a 7950X with an RTX 3080 Ti. So, that'll be the most performant that I'm able to see. And, that I've got two other boxes kind of in between those. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays across different hardware sets.
Yeah, everyone, do me a favor, by the way, we have 84 people watching. Please smash that like button if you haven't done so already. But no, Logic, I did actually utilize the settings that you provided. Was it Digital Trends that provided those settings? I don't remember.
Yes, Digital Trends.
Yeah. I didn't feel like tinkering because I was, having some issues like I think some other people were having with the getting access or getting the game to launch on Steam early access. I had to do what you suggested doing to finally get the game to launch last night. And at that point, I was already coming off Baldur's Gate 3. And so I didn't want to do any tinkering. And I said, you know what? I'm going to use these settings. And they work fine. But yeah, I typically don't adjust render resolution, but I did use the recommended per that article set render resolution at 75%. So
yeah, that was where I went to. And I mean, again, I will admit, like, in my arrogance, I was digging my heels in and resistant to using these. I tried. Another method that I normally use is, like, I'll try, like, setting the game at a certain bar and then like tweaking settings. But like I said, like, after 30 minutes of trying that, I was like, okay, fine, I give up. I'll just use your guys' recommended settings.
Yeah, Froggy T Ray wants to know, how much did FSR2 help out? I didn't switch off FSR2, so I don't know. Did you? Is that something you toggled with Game Logic?
Nope. Wasn't going to F with it. It was quite clear to me that FSR is absolutely required to make this game run well.
Yeah, that's what I got out of the remember the leaked article that we had talked about the settings and running at FSR 2.0, and I was thinking to myself, yeah, I'm not going to bother toggling it off because it seems like you definitely need to have FSR 2.0 to run this game. And for me, the frames are important. I don't want to play this game at 30 FPS, which we'll talk about here in just a second. So, but the other thing that I'll say, Logic, is that with Starfield, the marketing behind this game, the collector's edition, the watch, the headset, the controllers, and I've said this numerous times on this show, the controller is by far my favorite custom controller that Microsoft has put out so far for the Xbox. It is a thing of beauty, in my opinion. The headsets look great, but I'm not going to utilize their headsets. I don't need to. I have a pair of use my Artis headsets. The Xbox Series X, the wrap looks good, looks great, and they did other things. The consistent marketing on Twitter that I saw, I think I may even I believe I saw a commercial on TV for Starfield, but the use of an Imagine Dragons song, which if I don't know if anyone remembers, the PlayStation 4 used Imagine Dragons when they announced the PlayStation 4 back at E3, but anyhow. And then they also, what was really cool is that they had that like short anime cartoon on YouTube. I believe there was 3 of them. Froggy T. White's running how usable that watch actually is, Game Logic.
It kind of sits, you and I were talking about, I think before the show, it kind of sits between a fitness band and a smartwatch. So it was that's very slightly disappointing that it wasn't actually a Wear OS watch. That's what I was hoping. But I'm
sorry, man.
Yeah, what's that?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because of what Brian M. just said. Handy for timing the loading screens. That's pretty funny.
Brian's been savage in the chat today, man.
The loading screens are a thing in this game. Yeah, go ahead.
Let Xbox breathe, man. Let them stand up. Let them get on their feet. But it has functionality in line with a fitness. With a low end fitness band, and I mean it doesn't have fitness functionality, but it does have a step counter. But it has notifications, so everything that goes on my phone, I could raise the watch up. I could see text messages. I put a photo on Twitter where I was actually in a phone call with BRAP, right, and you could see the phone call status, on my wristwatch. You could, if I have a pair of, lots of times I have. TWS earbuds in, and sometimes they have mic functionality. So it's a scenario where, if my phone is sitting on my desk and I get a phone call, I can raise the watch and see who it is. And I can, I can click accept the phone call. And then, that'll obviously send it to my headset. You can control music from the headphones. It has music from the watch. It has a little sensor screen so that there's a point in the menu where you can pop it up and you can get, I think it's temperature, atmospheric pressure, and like 2 other things. So it's a novelty. It's neat. It has some minor functionality. That's very akin. And my overall feeling on smartwatch is not to make a quick segue. Actually, it is a tech way. Is that for me the biggest functionality for a smartwatch for me who has a long commute is for when I get text messages while I'm driving or phone calls while I'm driving, for me to raise the watch and just keep it in my line of sight of the road and see whether or not it's something that I actually need to pay attention to or pull over to the side of the road for. And let me tell you, I explained to you in some years of my life, having a wife at home who was either pregnant or had just had a kid, and you're an hour and a half away on a commute, that if that wife is calling you, telling you to stop and pick up dinner, that's damn well sure a text message you better make sure you receive before you drive home and park in the driveway and realize there's something you've missed. So from that aspect, it's fine, right, for a little add-in that was in the collector's edition. It was pretty neat.
Yeah, again, I wasn't expecting that level of functionality out of the watch. I thought it was kind of more of I thought it was going to be kind of more of a token type thing. But that's actually cool to hear that it has that level of functionality. Gregor says Xbox.
It has no in-game functionality. So just to put that out too, that was a mistaken thought that I had, that it would somehow break. It does. It does have an app. You load the app on your phone. It'll connect to the watch over Bluetooth, just like a regular smartwatch does. It does a firmware update where, for some reason, I'd say one little weird nit is it tells you don't let your phone lock while the update is happening, which to me was a little scary, because normally when I push some type of update from my phone, I just, it takes a while. I set the phone down and it's going to lock the screen on auto. So I had to be very hyper specific about keeping the phone on and open while the firmware update was loading. But then, like I said, then it tethers to your phone, right? Like any other smartwatch does.
Yeah. You might want to respond to Borbor in the live chat there. Happy's got a question for you. One of the things that I want to discuss today too is Starfield as a video game and what it means for the Xbox platform. I've been saying this for a long time, and where I was going with the marketing and the collector's edition, and we talked about this earlier too, Game Logic, just the zeitgeist around Starfield. Like, Microsoft hasn't had a game that's been talked about in quite some time in the way Starfield has. they haven't had a game that felt like a big blockbuster AAA type experience in quite some time. And those types of games, whether people want to admit it or not, are the kind of games that put Xbox on the map. Halo being the obvious, not Halo today, but Halo, Bungie Halo. Gears of War during the 360 generation. You go back to games like Ninja Gaiden, and I can go on and on. Yeah, Blessed Red says it's trending on Twitter. They haven't had that kind of zeitgeist for a big AAA blockbuster game in a long time. And I've been saying this, and we've been saying this for quite some time. They need a game like this. They need a game that's going to move the needle for the platform, that's going to get butts out of the seats to go out to the store and buy Xbox Series consoles. If you don't believe me, just look at the Series consoles numbers. The Series consoles are actually tracking behind at this point in the console generation to the Xbox One, which everyone would probably agree is the worst launch of any Xbox console, and will be remembered for the wrong reasons. And here's Starfield, and firing up Starfield for the first time when the music hits, and you hear you can just feel the production value, the music, and the presentation, and the way they marketed this game. It just, for me, it just generated a level of excitement for an Xbox first party game that I haven't had in years. And I do think they need more of that. And Starfield feels like that big blockbuster AAA game with great production values, great marketing behind, that they haven't had. Look, games like Hi-Fi Rush, those are nice. You know, those are the icing on the cake, if you will, but they're not the cake. You know, they're not going to really move the needle for the Xbox platform. And in my opinion, I think part of the reason why they've had trouble with growing Game Pass, why they've had issues with why the Xbox Series consoles are trekking behind the Xbox One, is because they haven't had those big game releases, those big games that really move the needle. And again, that's not to take anything away from games like Hi-Fi Rush or, Halo Infinite or Forza, but this is a new IP. I mean, when's the last time we saw an IP this big, new IP this big from Microsoft or for the Xbox? It's been a long time. So I hope we see more of this. But I have seen people logic. It's funny, we're talking about when Halo Infinite released, everyone said the King is back, and the King has been awfully quiet with Halo Infinite. Actually, very few people are playing that game right now. It's basically it's basically fallen off a cliff, and the way that game's been handled has been unfortunate. But I do caution people who are saying the Xbox is back, because I actually did see that today. That they need to be, Xbox needs to be more consistent putting out these types of experiences. It just can't be one. It's got to be more. It's got to be more consistent.
And what people, I mean, again, if you're trying to read the tea leaves, if you're trying to make predictions, if you're trying to understand, where the industry's going, how the competitors are competing, and you care about things like that, and I certainly understand some people just like to play their games and they don't like the business talk, and I A, understand it, but then B, I don't understand why those people come here, because this isn't that kind of show. And so my feeling is you and I have been talking, and I'm like, look, so Starfield is a thing. In my opinion, again, where the benchmark is for me today, the benchmark is Starfield is a great game. I don't know that it's going to get into the Game of the Year discussion. I don't know if it's indicative of that. It's not a game of the generation today. I fully expect that 5, 6, 7 years from now, right, when it is the newer, bigger game that it is, then there will absolutely be a discussion about it being a game of the generation, a game of the decade. But that's not where we are today. And my feeling on, the competitive and the performance evaluation of Microsoft in that aspect is, so you have Starfield, and just like you said, it's indicative of kind of what we want to see from the platform. The coins I think that you should count is, so Starfield is representative of what Xbox can accomplish when literally everybody and their mother pays attention to that one game. So we have seen indications since the Redfall debacle that all of management's focus has been on Starfield. all of the marketing push has been behind Starfield. Like, to be quite honest, like to the extent, like I feel like Forza to me looks like a redheaded stepchild in comparison to the effort that was put behind Starfield. And so the question becomes, okay, and I mentioned to you, like, we've heard all these great things about Starfield and what it's going to be and what it's going to do and blah, blah, blah. And, reinforcement of that from Matt Booty and Pete Hines and Phil Spencer and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, in the meantime, the Forza soundtrack has been all about the things that they're not going to have at launch. And I'm like, that to me represents like, what's the over under on that? Like, how is that being discussed in the boardroom on how that messaging is handled? And so the questions that there's going to be and what we're going to see here over the next 2 months is, okay, great. Everybody and their mother paid attention to Starfield. Okay, now what happens in the 6 weeks that they have for that attention and that focus to shift to Forza? And does it have enough runway? And if it doesn't, then what does that mean? What does that look like? I often, one of the things that I often talk about in my professional life is how I evaluate my own purpose, right? As in times that I've been an engineer or a solutions architect or an IPT lead or whatever, is that, and people will say, hey, you're paying a lot of attention to this, everybody else is paying attention to that. Why aren't you paying attention to that? I'm like, because everyone else is paying attention to it. Like, I don't need to be over there, right, in the khaki centipede, right, making sure that a thing is going to go well when literally all of my bosses are making sure that the thing goes well. My job is I need to pay attention to the thing that everybody else is ignoring so that doesn't blow up in our face as soon as this other thing is over. So it's just going to be kind of interesting to see, how this plays out.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how Starfield is going to move the needle for Xbox hardware and Game Pass subscriptions. Now, it seems to such steep numbers last night where, and by the way, for all the kicking and screaming about $70 games, look at what just happened on Steam. 200,000 plus concurrent players last night, early access. Those individuals paid $100 for early access. 200,000 people. Do the math. That's a lot of money. So, I mean, again, this goes back to what we've talked about on the show quite a bit about the market being segmented and people having different, consumers having different, liking different things and wanting early access to certain things and willing to pay $70 for games that they want. But again, I go back to, the fact that I'm just curious to see what the engagement numbers are going to be for Starfield on Game Pass, and then, how this impacts Microsoft or if it even moves the needle for subscription numbers. So I'm interested to see what that's going to look like, a couple months down the road. And I'm sure if there's a lot of millions of people playing Starfield, we'll get the tip of the usual tweet from Aaron Greenberg that 30 million people have tried Starfield or whatever the case is. So
yeah, so Tattoo Mark 501 in the chat says, this is the most fun game I played since GTA 5 launched. Nothing out there this good on consoles. I play all AAA to space and flight sims and know what I'm talking about. This is not, I can't see what that other word is.
Saying this is not mid top tier game of the year. Yeah,
so let me just respond to that. And again, I'm trying to respond to the chat less, but I just want to kind of firmly plant that. I'm not going to doubt that you feel it's the most fun game you've played since GTA 5 launch, or that you feel it's the best thing on consoles. I will say your assertion that Starfield is comparable to space and flight sims, and I'm responding to the label that you're utilizing there, sims, right? So space and flight simulations, which in that genre, you're talking about things like Star Citizen, you're talking about things like Elite Dangerous, you're talking about things like, as you said, space and flight sims, you're talking about Digital Combat Simulator, right? I'm going to tell you right now, Starfield is in no stretch of the imagination a simulation. And it approaches nowhere near the type of physics model fidelity that those types of games have. So I agree with you. Obviously, it has extra parts in it and extra things that are much more appealing to the mainstream. But your comparison of it to simulations is just completely off the radar. It charts. That's not a credible perspective at all. Sorry.
Yeah, he's saying the flying out of atmosphere and don't bother me. Doesn't bother him.
Yeah, and
I played Star Citizen. It's a waste of time for console players. I mean,
I don't.
Star Citizen's not for.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
But
it's not for the casual. Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. Right. And that's where I say where it needs to be trued up. Right. By virtue of its inherent definition, the term simulation means that on the market it's going to play to simulations aren't for casual people. Forza Motorsport is not for casual players. Star Citizen, Digital Combat Simulator, et cetera. Those things are not for casual players.
Yeah.
Admittedly, this game probably has other things in its total package. And that's an argument that could certainly be had, but I would take a hard stance against somebody using the simulation label and applying it to Starfield.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. T-Spite says Starfield's disappointing. I mean, T-Spite, how many hours have you played Starfield? Have you beat the game? I mean, this is the other side of the argument that I've seen, by the way. People who haven't really sunk a lot of hours or sunk their teeth into Starfield are making these comparisons to Fallout, Skyrim, or Oblivion. And it's like, well, how many hours did you play those games? Speaking of Fallout, I really got the Fallout vibes for the amount of time that I played so far at Starfield. Jeff Grubb said something that the game feels familiar very early on, and I was like, okay, yeah, it definitely does. It gave me a lot of the Fallout vibes. And visually speaking, Starfield is probably Bethesda's best looking game that I've played, but that's not saying much because their games typically don't look good. But that's because of the sheer size, scope, scale of their video games. I mean, that's not what they're going for. So I understand that, but no,
and if I'm going to slice that very finely, like I feel like from a visual perspective, I mean, this is a great looking game, in my opinion. Again, I am not.
Yeah, I don't think it looks bad, but
yeah, I'm not somebody who's like, uber specific about finely slicing things like that. But I personally feel it's a great looking game. The thing I really like is the stylistic approach to the graphics in terms of kind of that sepia tone lens and filter over everything, which I think gives the game a very like specific character. Kind of an earthy feel that just makes it distinctive and stand out. So visually, like I said, when I'm walking around slow, I think that's great. Yeah. But it's but like I said, there are some little sticking points right when it starts moving quickly, right, that I'm not as appreciative of.
The earthy feel that you talked about is one of the things I don't like about it. But I think, again, I said this to you earlier in the week. I said, you know what? I'm going to try not to compare this game to Baldur's Gate 3. But Baldur's Gate 3 is very different, very vibrant colors, vibrant atmosphere, foliage, things like that. And that's not, at least from what I've seen so far of Starfield, or my playing of Starfield, that's not been the case. And so that could be it too, where coming up Baldur's Gate 3, that's kind of ingrained in my brain a little bit. But I do think the game actually looks pretty good. Like when I was in the ship, I was like, oh, this looks pretty good. But I do think I've played, all the Fallout games and the Elder Scrolls games. This is Bethesda's best looking game. But I would also caution people not to look to Bethesda for games that are going to visually, I guess, wow you or visually going to set the bar for how AAA games look in the gaming industry. It's just not that their focus is. Yeah.
I would actually push on that a little. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of pushback from other people. I mean, MB Money mentioned his thing about facial animations, and like that's not a area that like I pick a lot of threads at. But like I feel like this game visually is very much up to snuff. With anything else that I would have played this year.
Yeah.
Again, for the setting and the thing that it's portraying, right, which is a hyper realistic, grittier, earthier, like realistic presentation. Like in my mind, you can't take this game in its artistic approach and compare it to Ratchet and Clank, right, which is a completely fantastical environment full of color and glitz and shiny baubles. That's not Starfield. But if I'm gonna compare a Starfield to a realistic first person shooter, like I feel like it's definitely stands shoulder to shoulder with those.
Yeah. All right. So I do want to, we talked about performance earlier, Starfield. And one of the things that gamers were disappointed about, and a lot of this goes back to Microsoft's marketing of the Xbox Series X. It eating monsters for breakfast, the 60 FPS, 120. And
most powerful console in the industry, right?
Yeah, most powerful console ever. Most powerful console in the industry. We've kind of seen how that's played out. And so a lot of us were like hoping or thinking, like and this part of this too for me is 40 years of gaming, and every time we've entered a new console generation, we've seen an improvement in performance. We've seen games. I mean, geez, Logic, you remember when games went from 2D to 3D? Remember that? Like that was that was huge. We've seen games go from 480 to 720 to 1080 to 4K. We've seen games increase in performance. We've seen larger games. I mean, just look at the evolution of Bethesda games. Remember Todd Howard saying, "See that mountain, Skyrim? You can actually go there now." So there's always been that expectation of improved performance with new hardware, new console generations, and Blessed Red. We also had 60 FPS games on PS3, so that's just a dumb comment. And I'm going to say dumb to you because you're being very disingenuous in the conversation we're having about 4K native and 30 FPS locked to Starfield. And you didn't know what you don't know what anti-consumer is either. So. And one of the reasons why I was like, you know what, I'm going to go PC, is because I can get 60 FPS. Okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to enjoy the game at the I don't want to play this game at 30 FPS. Like, I was like, that's not going to work for me. So anyhow, so Ryan McCaffrey actually tweeted out something that's interesting, and I was kind of surprised by this commentary. That somehow the 30 FPS conversation on Series X was fake outrage. And I'm going to read his tweet here. He says, "By the way, I will say that while I only have 12 hours into Starfield so far, in my opinion, the 30 FPS on Series X fake outrage was just that, fake. With 60 FPS been awesome, sure. Will we get a performance mode patched in later? Probably. But does it play just fine on the Series X now? Yep." I think that what Ryan's missing is that, sure, were they people out there trolling and, upset about, just trolling the Xbox community about the whole 30 FPS thing? Absolutely. But they are people that generally wanted a 60 FPS experience based on the things I just mentioned about Microsoft's marketing of the Xbox Series X console. And this idea, does it play fine on the Series X now? Yep. Like, for him, it may, but for others, that's not an acceptable bar for performance. Like me and like you, Logic, and like other people who are playing this game on PC right now. And it was such and this is follow up by his commentary on the PlayStation VR 2, which I wouldn't have had an issue if he would have said they aren't games that I want, but he's saying there's no games, and in fact they are games. And so we've had Ryan on the show twice, and I appreciate that. I've enjoyed Ryan's coverage of the gaming industry, of Xbox. He started on the original Xbox magazine many, many years ago on the original Xbox, through the original Xbox days, moved over to IGN, now is executive editor. Like I said, we've had him on the show twice. He's always been a great guest. But I just think this is a very bad take. I think it's dismissive of the fact that you have people, consumers that generally weren't happy about 30 FPS because that's the experience they want. Some of that's based on, again, marketing by Microsoft. Some of that is based on preference. And so this one was a head scratcher for me, Logic. And I hate to say this, like I actually expect a little bit more insight and more thought from Ryan McCaffrey compared to like maybe a Destin Legary. But it always seems like maybe he's heading down that road, and I don't know if it's again just my opinion. I don't know if it's something that is motivated by trying to drive traffic, because we know that outrage, anger feeds the algorithm. But it was an odd take, and one that I disagree with. And actually, it's all Slow-Mo actually responded to Ryan McCaffrey as well. I'm not sure if Ryan blocked Slow-Mo, but I thought it was a bit disingenuous, because there are people that want that experience, legitimate feel that game is not a game they would enjoy at 30 frames per second. Yeah. So is it okay if I read my response to Ryan? Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm going to be a little bit probably not as I don't know. Go ahead. So I quote tweeted his tweet and mentioned him, because I feel like quote tweeting somebody without mentioning them is cowardly. I told him, I used to respect you as one of the few remaining in gaming journalism who had enough domain expertise and the willingness to address things with nuance and sophistication. These increasing number of binary takes shows a shift in outreach to the lowest common denominator. It's professionally embarrassing and in keeping with everything that has brought the notion of journalism and gaming to its knees. No better than the worst attention farming YouTuber. I'd come to expect better, and I'm disappointed. But my guess is that you and your peers at IGN don't care. And that last bit is because I've seen a trend in that direction, from starting with Destin. Then I've seen Max Scoville kind of go down the same path. And now I see Ryan McCaffrey doing it, who to me it's the most egregious pivot, because, one of the great series that he had started was, I can't remember the name of it, but it was IGN. What was the interview series he had? So he would sit down with executives. Yeah. I mean, it was one of the most... It was a one-on-one. Yeah, very insightful. It was one of the best features that were going up on IGN. And this, he was kind of, it kind of came off as kind of being the, and memory's failing me now because I didn't pay it. Was Barbara Walters the great interviewer from TV who had like all the big interviews and stuff? Yes, Barbara Walters, yeah. Yeah, Barbara Walters, Walter Cronkite did those for a little while. Never as big a name in it as Barbara was, but I'm like Ryan, this is how you had positioned yourself, and now what you're doing is you're taking a very sophisticated topic, and taking it and grinding it down to being dismissive of people's discussions on the matter as console warring. And so you're visiting intentions on everyone's arguments, applying causality to it, and then therefore saying, because your argument must be motivated by this bad thing, it's therefore to be dismissed. And I'm like, that's problematic. And I was, before I wrote that, I was originally planning on going down the technical path with him, but I was like, he's probably not just going to play that game. And so you and I have talked about, right, the fact that graphic performance was constrained to 60 frames per second and 30 frames per second, right, or 30 frames per second. And it's clear that the target for that was really 60 frames per second on PC, in my opinion, is representative of an overall design approach to Starfield and the systems that they were building and how they were going to handle graphical fidelity and graphical performance. It is represented by the thing that I mentioned earlier, 17 toggles, right, of things you can manipulate to adjust your graphical experience within the game, which for PC games to me is a bit anemic, right? When I look at something like a Call of Duty or a Halo, which has twice as many things you can toggle, right? And I get that you can have an argument about whether or not it needs more than that for for an RPG, and that's a fine argument to have. But my point and my stance is it's a conversation, and it's not something to be dismissed. And where I stand in the conversation is I've gone off and I've spent hundreds of dollars on a CPU, thousands of dollars on a GPU to stuff them in a rig to have a game
where I can't decide what my experience is. And I've said before, my benchmark for what I want my experience is not necessarily, what a developer decides. And that's one of the reasons I play on PC, because I play at 1440p ultra wide, because sometimes I'm more concerned about frames than visual fidelity, because like I'm not a great critic of how good graphics look, right? But I do want performance. And that what I prefer in my games is for that to be my choice, not for you to dictate it to me. But I mean, what's clear is that by targeting 30 and only working with AMD for FSR, it's clearly representative of a behavior and a trend of decisions that team was making that caused them to go down the path of, we're going to limit and constrain the options that people have. And that overall, as a big package, has an impact. No FOV slider, limited options on graphics, limited performance, only having FSR delivered, right? So don't just take the frames and isolate it as this one thing and say that it's all about console warring, when you as a journalist should be capable of doing these additional decompositions and showing the trend and showing the behavior and linking that to these other things that are in the game, right? And then making a summary statement of, hey, you have to decide as a PC gamer in particular whether or not that sits well with you. Right? That's the conversation in my mind that should be had from somebody who's a journalist with his level of experience, rather than just participating in console warring, right, and being dismissive of it.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And that was the disappointment, that he basically put everyone in this one bucket. And as a journalist, and the amount of years of experience he has as a journalist, that he didn't show, or he didn't acknowledge the fact that, no, this conversation's not just console wars. It's actually a little more nuanced than that there are actually people in the market that want that kind of experience. And if he was addressing console wars, he should have said so.
Yeah, he behaved like a child. He behaved unprofessionally. It's indicative of a trend of the IGN editor bullpen, in my opinion. And like I said on Twitter, I've now, and I'm very, look, my opinion doesn't matter, but I will say I'm very formal and very process oriented about firmly putting things like this in this bucket. And I've talked on this show and I've talked with you before about how, hey, there are some journalists that are across this line where they're just off the map. They're not credible. They're not valid. And I don't want to hear what their opinions are. Their analysis is trash, right? They're just acting like children. And so welcome to the suck, Ryan McCaffrey, and all of the IGN editors, because you're now in the same bucket as Windows Central, Jason Schreier, and Tom Warren.
I got to stop sending you Tom Warren articles.
Please do.
No, but it was a take that you would hear from a fanatical YouTuber. That's disappointing for me, because again, we've had him on the show. I've always enjoyed his work. I felt like he was one of the few journalists that really did a good job of having that more nuanced conversation. And he just has, like, the PlayStation thing, and now this. It almost seems like you said, it's this pivot, this quick pivot.
Yeah, it's just a bucket. It's just a bucket of perspectives that I've talked about this on the show, right? There are people who voice things along this line of, it's Jerry Springer, Maury Povich, Geraldo Rivera, kind of sensationalist tabloid fare. And I'm sorry, I don't read the Inquirer, so I'm not going to pay attention to content of similar ilk on the internet.
I don't read the Inquirer. That's funny. And by the way, like, who is it? There's a guy in the chat here saying Starfield is trash. IGN gave it a PC gamer 7 out of 10. El Nini, play the game. Play the game. Like, don't like be an adult. Play the game. This, I'm getting tired now, to the point where, like, people are coming in and saying stuff, utilize language like trash or L. Like, you're just gonna get. Your comment's going to be deleted.
All right, and here's where you have to have, in my opinion, you have to have balance in your overall takeaway from the conversation, right? IGN gave it a 7, GameSpot gave it a 7. Part of the language that I don't agree with, right, is obviously the game is being weaponized, and how the game is landing is being weaponized, and you have tons of people who are out there saying, look, it's an 88 807 game, Xbots were wrong again, and I'm like, look, I don't agree with the conversation that a game is a 90 or above or else it's worthless. That's really kind of an ignorant perspective, in my opinion. An 88 game is a good game, maybe bordering on being a great game. Now I will say, right, part of the reason you're getting that response is because there were lots of Xbox people running around saying this game is the game of the century, it's the game of the generation, it's the game of the decade. It's definitely going to be 94 to 95. And on top of that, what we have is those people also saying any review that's out there that gives this game less than a 9 is biased. I'm like, no, you have to accept that different people have different opinions, right, on games, and just stop it, right? So there's wrong on both sides, right, about how it's being approached. The game is landing well. The game has some rough edges. When we comment on those rough edges, when I comment on those rough edges, it's because that's what we do, right? Because we played several, 8.5, 9 games in a year. And my personal feeling is even amongst those, which is the ones that I try and spend my time with, comparatively, all of them have chinks in their armor, right, to be discussed. That was the other analogy I wanted to bring up. Part of the problem, I think, too, in the language today is part of what's going on now from the Xbox side about Starfield and the rabid defense of it in the allowing no room for any criticism to be against the game is the same thing that the PlayStation community did about The Last of Us Part 2. Nowhere was there any space in a PlayStation fan discussion for there to be any suggestion of a criticism about The Last of Us Part 2.
I don't know about that logic. I don't know. There were a lot. I say a lot. There were people that in the PlayStation community that were not happy with the story direction of The Last of Us Part 2, nor do they care for the character of Abby.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say valid conversations. Like people who had problems with the sexuality of Abby, like are off the map, and I don't pay any attention to those people. But I'm saying,
yeah, I mean, there were some people that were like that was a thing too. But there are actually people that didn't care for playing as Abby. They just didn't like they didn't like that story break of going from now I forgot her name now.
The back and forth from Ellie.
Yeah, they didn't like that. And they were like, why do we need to play as Abby? Like, what role does she serve in this game? They would have preferred the focus to be on now I'm forgetting her name now. I played the game like 4 times. Not Last of Us Part 2, but The Last of Us. Ellie, like they didn't want it. They didn't want that. They wanted to go back to. They wanted to keep the game similar to how The Last of Us progressed, and not back and forth between Ellie and Abby. Thank you, Just Wait.
Okay, so I'll just chalk that up to those were the conversations I was in. Anytime I've been in any conversation to bring up a criticism on TLU 2, I always get the same yelling and shouting and trying to silence as the Xbox guys do.
Yeah, no, and I've seen that. I'm not saying that hasn't happened, Logic, because I've seen that. But there were some legitimate criticisms by the PlayStation community of The Last of Us Part 2, and even to this day, I think some of the more level-headed conversations I've had with PlayStation fans about The Last of Us versus Last of Us 2, a lot of them kind of flesh out why they preferred The Last of Us Part 1 to the Part 2. And it isn't anything that's based on hate for Abby. It's more of the way the story was presented. And there's some other things that happened in the game they didn't agree with from a storytelling perspective. But I won't get into that because that would lead to spoilers. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, point those people out to me. If they're online, I'll pay attention to them. I'm not going into spaces because those are just big bukakis. But if those people exist, definitely let me know.
I don't think you say that on YouTube, by the way. I'm joking. Go ahead, man. Yeah, go ahead, Logic. Was that? Are you done with that point?
Yeah. That was it.
Okay. All right. So look, here we go. Donnell Brown with the $5 super chat. Let me pull up the super chat here real quick. Donnell Brown's a Raiders fan. I don't know why. Tell you should just come over to the burgundy and gold. Come root for a team that's actually going to win this season. All right, Don O'Brien with the $5 super chat says, here BRAP goes with his cap again. Next week he's going to be crying about his Washington football, shaking my head all up. There he goes, man. The commander slander. All right. Well, I'll say this just regarding Starfield Logic. I'm looking forward to spending some time this weekend during the holiday weekend to sink my teeth into it. And I'm definitely going to be discussing this game as I get as I log in some more time. So this game really does. And look, and I'm excited. I've if you've been listening to the show, I've been excited for Starfield for quite some time. That sci-fi space exploration game, that itch that I have to experience that kind of game is hopefully Starfield scratches that itch. I mean, I've been having that since, Mass Effect. So I'm looking forward to playing more of Starfield. So
no, that's good, man. I will say you're more up on it than I am. What the game incentivizes me to do, but unfortunately I just don't have time to get into them right now, is to reinstall Elite Dangerous and Star Citizen. But maybe No Man's Sky as well. I will say, again, the No Man's Sky comparisons were foolish back then, and they're still foolish today. 30 seconds into Starfield, you can immediately tell it's not No Man's Sky. They're just radically different games, completely different spirituality to them.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I have no interest in going back and playing No Man's Sky. It just didn't really move the needle for me. Didn't really keep me engaged. But yeah, go ahead, Logic.
Now, as I say, Corey Massey in the chat says, love TLOU 2, one of the greatest stories in video game history. And this is part of what I'm trying to convey, Corey. It's in these conversations and what I push for, what I think should be allowed. I agree. TLOU 2 is absolutely one of the best games ever. Red Dead Redemption 2 was one of the best games ever. Monster Hunter World is a great game. I didn't personally like those three games, and there should be room for conversation, right, to have on those topics.
Yeah, without someone saying, "Oh, that's cap," So it's a great point, Logic. Donna Brown with $2 super chat says, "I have a Sean Taylor jersey." As you should. Some of the live chat still arguing about. Look, LDD, Starfield planets don't exist. Okay, fine. I mean, so
it's a video game. It exists.
Yeah, that's true. Nothing. It's a different design philosophy, different experience. I don't. I mean, this is just the problem I have with the conversation at times. If people just hate on games or things that they haven't played, all over brand loyalty. It's ridiculous. Reggie Skull says Red Dead was better than Red Dead 2. I don't disagree with that, Reggie. I did enjoy Red Dead more than Red Dead 2. I liked Red Dead 2, but I thought Red Dead was better than Red Dead 2, in my opinion. All right. So Logic, are you going to be spending some more time with Starfield this weekend, or are you going to be kind of mixing with some other games that you're playing?
No, I am. I've got a clip up on over on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. I'll get some Let's Plays up over the weekend. What I was saying before is, you're more up on it than I am, and I will admit I am playing today, right now. Like I'm not sitting here going, oh man, I can't wait till I get done with work and go play Star Citizen. I am definitely going into session 2 because I'm playing out of obligation. Whether or not that changes in the course of session 2, right before I go to session 3, that may happen. But that's just where I spent a lot of time in the first 2 hours fighting jank. Fighting the inventory management system not really being great, fighting the, as somebody mentioned before, like it not being intuitive on how you switch weapons. Fighting the fast travel, like they jam the fast travel down your throat, and it really kind of grates against me as somebody who's like, I'll decide if I need fast travel or not. Like I don't need you like jumping up and down, setting a trash can on fire, right? Being insistent that I use it. Not really being happy with the space navigation, which to me is a core part of the experience of playing a space game. So I spent a lot of the first couple hours kind of fighting the game, admittedly fighting the game from some things that I'm kind of normally been programmed to do and expect. Playing these space exploration games, space simulations. Some of them I think were niceties, like in quality of life, like look, normally navigating to another star system in a space simulation game, that is a whole task in and of itself. Like spooling the quantum drive in in Star Citizen and navigating and setting waypoints, and you have to worry about how much fuel you have, and does this have to be a multi-leg jump, and do I have to go somewhere and land and pick up fuel? And yeah, like it's far more of a orchestra than it is here, where you just kind of point and click and go to it. But by the same token, there are instances where they say, at least like I said, in the first couple hours I was in, where they're like, you need to fast travel to do this, and I'm like I was clicking fast travel and it was landing me outside the city, but completely away from where I needed to go. And then I was like, okay, I don't need to fast travel because it's not working. So stop pushing it down my throat. And finally I had to figure out a way to kind of deviate. And as you and I mentioned, I encountered one major mission bug that fortunately the game recovered from. But in other instances of other games, in particular like The Witcher 3, those types of things where something gets out of sequence in terms of event triggers, that's the type of thing that will completely break a side quest in The Witcher and in The Witcher 3 and make it, and you'll never be able to complete that side quest of that playthrough again. So on one hand, it's a compliment to Bethesda that the code was resilient enough to accommodate that event trigger and can kind of recover from what had gotten broken. But like, it's why I'm pushing it back against this whole notion of propaganda that I see running around saying that, there's no bugs. I'm like, come on. Like, even for somebody who's not a software developer, like, should acknowledge that, that's not the case.
I saw that and I laughed. Millions of lines of code. Would you say that's mathematically impossible for there to be no bugs?
Oh, it's absolutely. It is a standard rule in software development that there's no application that does not have bugs. It is literally mathematically impossible because the budget of all the testing that would be required to surface every single bug, right, would be astronomically above what the cost of the associated product is. So it's just, yeah. And I mean, part of my formal training is in defect containment and defect management. And so, yeah, that's just not a, I mean, what we're taught formally is a bunch of math formulas that allow us to calculate and project what the number of defects are, ascertain which ones, we're just never going to discover, and then target a metric that drives us to a certain amount of testing in a certain way and methodology and approach that allows us to hit a certain percentage that we declare as acceptable for shipping the code.
Yeah. All right, Logic. Well, look, we're going to wrap up this show. Please do me a favor. We have like 120 people watching. Hit that like button if you haven't done so already. If you're new to the show, consider subscribing and hitting the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. And we're going to discuss Starfield more as we sink our teeth into this game. Probably talk a little bit more about it next Wednesday. But want to give a big thank you to everyone in the live chat. Sorry about the technical issues earlier, but I do appreciate everyone following us over to the new link to the show. Again, OBS was giving us some issues, so hopefully that gets fixed. If not, we'll be doing shows from StreamYard. StreamYard's not a bad alternative, but everyone, thank you again. If you're playing Starfield, this weekend, I'm curious to get your thoughts as well. So join us on the show Wednesday. Feel free to provide your thoughts to Starfield in the live chat as well on Wednesday night show. But Logic, always a pleasure talking video games with you. If you want to be found, let everyone know they can find you.
Yeah, you can catch me on the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast over on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Wednesday night, Sunday nights at about 8:45 p.m. Eastern. Or you can just catch up with my my running and recurring, always going up content over on the Rounding Off Infinity gaming channel on YouTube as well. So there's always stuff going up there. Sometimes new games, sometimes old games, sometimes live streams, sometimes Let's Plays. But you can find that stuff over there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, sounds good. All right, everyone. Enjoy the weekend. Have fun playing video games because ultimately that's what it's all about. And we will catch you on Wednesday night at this coming Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time. I will also be on Crossfire this evening on Mooch's channel. He's going to be discussing Starfield as well. So head over there if you want to get a variety of different perspectives on Starfield. So thank you again, everyone. We'll catch you next time.